brought to you by the Ayn Rand Center UK, where we talk about current events and all things that matter through an objectivist point of view. Joining me today is the great Jonathan Hoenig. How are you, Jonathan?
Great to be with you, Mark. Lots to talk about. I'm happy to see so many of our super chatters and philosophy posse members and members for the Ayn Rand Center UK joining us already on the live stream today.
Yes. Well, so today we have a little interesting tidbit of news. Apparently, billionaires are leaving Norway in record numbers after a 1.1 rise of the income tax. And of course, we are going to talk about this from an objectivist perspective, which will likely be different than every other perspective out there, particularly from The Guardian. You know, Jonathan, when you read this article from The Guardian, I thought the notation at the very end, I don't know if you read that, where the author talked about supporting The Guardian because it's an unconventional take on news, and it's not driven by profit, it's not driven by corporate interest, it's not like the typical news media. I had to laugh at that. If anybody can read that article, read the end and you'll see.
Yeah, here it is. No, the Guardian has a plea for donations as well.
A plea for donations from the capitalist sucks that they despise so much and constantly write bad things about in the newspaper. So let's talk about this a little bit. What do you think of this from your perspective?
Well, you know, this seems to me, Mark, like people vote with their feet. If they're rational, they do ultimately vote with their feet. This phenomena of people leaving high tax locations and moving to lower tax locations, it's happening concurrently here in the US. You know, here it's mostly from what they call the Northeast and the Midwest to the Sun Belt, the lower tax Florida and California. But, you know, even we talked about a bit before we started today, you know, Exile on Mainville, which is the Stones album, occurred because the Stones left the UK in the early 70s when the tax rate was 93%. They were tax exiles. So, you know, what I think is more interesting is not necessarily that this happens, but why morally it's allowed to happen. And it seems like, once again, you know, we as objectivists are among the only few finding the moral foundation of what's wrong about not only taxing anyone, but in particularly taxing the most productive among us.
Yeah, indeed. In California, we have that phenomenon. 350,000 people left last year. And these aren't just rich people, folks. These are middle-income people and people striving to be rich, but they can't because the boot of Gavin Newsom in the California state legislature is on their neck and keeping them from rising. And it's a real phenomenon. They're moving to the South and, as you said, the Sun Belt, where they actually respect property rights. So Norway is probably going crazy about this, I imagine, because they are losing a tremendous amount of capital, and they rely on that capital. They parasitize that capital for their social welfare system. So, how do you think this? How do you think the billionaires themselves can justify this? Growing up in a system where they're told they're bad if they're billionaires, and they really should let the system parasitize them if they're decent people. Do you know the popular reaction to this stuff?
Well, I applaud those, Mark, who don't make themselves martyrs and parasites and who do get away one way or the other. You know, what's so kind of tragic is the morality, I think, that allows that to happen, that says that, you know, successful people are bad because they have more than those who are unsuccessful, and that it's moral, in fact, to go and take from them. You know, we both are friends with Don Watkins, objectivist, a relatively very smart guy, I should say. He once made the point of, you'd never go to your neighbor's house and say, give me your computer or give me $1,500. But it's okay for some reason when you have government vote to do that. So you just that very notion that somehow the rich owe everyone else, they made it on the backs of everyone else, and what's moral is for government to literally go to their house and take that from them. It just doesn't seem like the foundation of a moral society or ultimately a successful society either.
I agree with you. And when you go on Fox Business, you know, you'd be one of the only sane voices in a sea of, you know, 5 or 6, you know, quote unquote conservatives. You were the only one actually standing up for the right to be wealthy and the right to dispose of your income as you see fit, for true capitalism as we define it. Yeah, so we have this moral enemy called altruism out there that's being it's not even being hijacked, it's just being exploited for the benefit of the political class. They're able to use that ethics to guilt people into sustaining them. Right. I mean, I don't think this is even, I mean, it's such a cynical system. It's not even, I mean, altruism can't be based on benevolence, but even the ends, the end of a quote unquote equal society isn't a benevolent or good end.
No, I mean, it's like we see it play out in North Korea, we see it play out in Cuba, and it's just been tried over and over again. But Mark, as you always point out, no, it's the morality that kind of keeps us going back there. And, Miss Rand wrote something in a wonderful compendium of the letters of Ayn Rand. This is available now when people say, oh, I know objectivism is saying, have you read, there's so much out there. And, Mark, she approaches this particularly. She says, if you don't mind, I'll quote, she says, in view of what they hear of the experts, the people cannot be blamed for their ignorance and their hapless confusion. If an average housewife struggles with her incomprehensibly shrinking budget and sees a tycoon in a resplendent limousine, she might well think that just one of his diamond cufflinks would solve all of her problems. She has no way of knowing that if all the personal luxuries of all the tycoons were expropriated, it would not feed her family and millions of other similar families for 1 week, and that the entire country would starve on the first morning of the week to follow. How would she know it if all the voices she hears are telling her we must soak the rich? And this was written in the 70s. This is Miss Rand in the 70s. Brilliance once again.
She was prescient. I mean, we see Atlas Shrugged happening before us right now. I mean, this is a little bit off topic, but I'm hearing that they're threatening a digital currency, a federal digital currency right now, that it's beyond the research phases. They're trying to implement this within the Biden administration's time frame. Is this a fact? I mean, this is an even scarier thing, because money, to me, even though it's a medium of exchange, when it was a commodity, when it was something like gold or silver, you owned it. It was a piece of property. Nobody could take it away from you. The further away we get from that into the digital world, where your life can be tied into this digital currency in a way that we saw worked very unfortunately for those truckers, protesting truckers in Canada, this could be the beginning of a type of social engineering from the political, not the beginning, but it could be a final step towards a social engineering on the political class. Is this digital currency going to go through, whether we like it or not?
I've heard rumblings of it as well, Mark. I mean, I don't know too much about it, but I think it is extraordinarily frightening. I mean, to me, it's mixing the reason and force even closer together. Reason, your money is the product, in my mind, of your reason, your ability to create, produce, trade with other people. And now government comes along, which is force. It's a necessary force. I'm glad we have government, but what role does government have in manipulating and controlling your wealth? The product of your labor. They seem to feel as if they have a right to it, as you pointed out, Mark. And places like California, the top tier income tax, I believe, is upwards of 50, 60, 70%. So you think you work, 7 out of 10 days you work for the government, and then the last 3 days of your life of that, you work for yourself. I mean, I don't want to be hyperbolic, but paraphrasing Ms. Rand, isn't it that the man who works for the benefit of others is a slave?
Indeed, that's true, but they would act as if your language is hyperbolic, because after all, it's investing in a welfare system. It's investing in those people who need it, and they can't see the relationship between democratic socialism and the welfare state that's parasitizes off of capitalism, and its further evolution into the North Korea, Venezuela socialist catastrophe. They don't see the relationship between those two. And I'm sure that I could think of tons of actors who probably read that article and say, a 1.1, unless they're rich, of course, 1.1% tax. Come on, you're going to miss 1.1% of your wealth when you're a billion. I mean, these guys aren't multi-billionaires like in America. I think their net worths are in the neighborhood of 1.5 or $2 billion. But still, yes, I would. But everybody's so ashamed to admit that.
And especially, I'll say, when it comes even down to the smaller business person's level, where on a state or local or even regional tax base, they say, oh, an extra 1%, an extra 2%. But, Mark, for everyday business people, many business, that's their entire profit margin, might be 1 or 2%. So, again, Rand said this back in the 70s. No one tells her, she's talking about that kind of, I don't know, everyday housewife, if you will. No one tells her that the higher taxes imposed on the rich and the semi-rich will come not out of their consumption expenditures, but out of their investment capital, i.e. their savings. And such taxes will mean less investment, less production, fewer jobs, higher prices for scarcer goods. And by the time the rich have to lower their standard of living, hers will be gone along with her savings and her husband's job. No power in the world, no economic power will be able to revive the dead industries. There will be no such power left. That's, I think, Rand's point is, we see, oh, well, the rich have too nice of boat. Let's tax their consumption. But it's their production. It's that innovation. It's that investment that powers the rest of the world. Ultimately, why Atlas shrugs in the book and why so much of the world, it seems, is creaking to a halt.
Yeah, but how can we have Rand's literature that's been out there for 50 plus years. We've had her great nonfiction that's been out there for 50 plus years. We've got great objectivists out there in the world like Yaron Brook, and you talking about capitalism in very, very clear terms, moral terms, terms that we haven't really heard before outside of objectivism, and spreading this. And yet the message still seems to be lost on folks out there who will still look at this and say, this is nothing to the billionaire. He should eat that 173 million kroner.
Well, Ashley Shrugged, who is one of our important philosophy posse, she contributed a very generous $2 US. Thank you, Ashley. She says, I'm not wealthy and my taxes are a freaking killer. And I think that's exactly it. When you set up this dog-eat-dog society of taking from some to give to the others and creating this entitlement state and this welfare state, it's just eating the seed stock. Rand talks about the seed stock to fuel economy. You're eating your own seed stock and everyone feels it. If nothing else, Mark, the inflation created by government expansion of the money supply. And that's such a terrible direct tax on everyone. Worldwide are feeling it. Even the so-called not so rich are feeling it. So, once again, this example of government morality doing good hurts us all in the medium, short, and long term as well.
Yeah, and I'm hearing the rumblings from the bank community that, the couple of bank closures that we've had out here are just the tremors, the foreshocks of something much more severe to come. It seems to me $31 trillion in debt with $200 trillion in unfunded liabilities, no end in sight with the current administration. And if God forbid somebody like Trump gets in, was the biggest spender pre-Biden, no end in sight when the Republicans get in power. We are headed for the cliff. The chickens are coming home to roost the way Rand predicted many, many, many years ago, but they're coming to roost in our lifetime. I get the sense. You have your feelers out there in the financial world. Do you get that sense as well?
Well, for what it's worth, gold is shooting up in the last couple of months, especially in hard assets writ large. But, Mark, to your point, here domestically, there are no more advocates for reforming the entitlement states. Those have gone out the window. The entitlement state, welfare, Medicare, all that is seen as sacrosanct now. So whether this one has to make a little cut or that one has to make a little cut, there's no voices, there's no appetite, there's no interest in reform, let alone repeal of this albatross around the neck of every single American. So that's what gives me, and I don't think it's going to be a day of reckoning, like one day fire and brimstone, but what it is this slow, methodical degradation in people's quality of life. That's what really worries me. Not so much one day there's a collapse, but that people's quality of life goes down and down, further and further. It's really what you've seen in Japan in the last 20 and 30 years, their so-called lost decade. And that's my big fear moving forward in the US, Mark, I must say.
Well, I don't know if you can even can you express your true feelings about this, even being you're a hedge fund guy, right?
Sure.
Those
are my absolute true feelings. Yeah, generally markets don't tend to collapse in one day, but it's that slow degradation in quality of life, and that's really what inflation is more than anything. We can't really tell it, but people realize they're working more, making less, the quality of their life is going down. So that's my big fear moving forward. And of course, that only happens when government gets involved.
And now it seems like the Fed, we're getting sort of off topic, but it's a curiosity to me. It seems like the Fed is stuck between a rock and a hard place, because the more it raises interest rates, the more these banks that are leveraged, the more they get into financial trouble, and the more they feel a sense of obligation to bail them out, and the more it seems to spiral into an inflation spiral, because I don't see how they can avoid that since they're pumping more money into the banking system. It seems like they can't really do anything to save us, and I don't even think a withdrawal can save us.
What's the right move for a central planner? There is no right move. There's no right move a central planner can make. Central planning itself is corrupt. And whether in terms of interest rates, or even in terms of, so-called entitlement state, that's why they're all bankrupt. And, I wish I could, advise the right move for the Fed, other than would be to transition over time to eliminating the Fed. But I don't think we're heading that direction just yet, Mark. So it's just a question of trying to make the best moves for yourself. And unfortunately, politically, I think this notion of soak the rich moves us in just the opposite direction, because it's scaring capital away. It's literally scaring capital away from areas, and it's scaring, as Ms. Rand points out, not the consumption of the rich, but the investment of the rich. That's what makes the whole world, powers the whole world forward. So that's what we're not going to see. Bastiat talked about what is unseen in economics. So that's what I fear is not what we're going to see, but what's unseen, because rich investors say, you know what? Forget this. I don't want to take the risk. I don't want to take the public headache. I don't want to take the taxation hit. I'm going to put it in CDs or gold.
Yeah, there's a big iceberg under the water that we're not seeing yet, but beware, because we've seen the tip of the iceberg in these bank closures and in the inflation that may soon be run away, as the Misesians have been warning us all along. One of the reasons I don't think there's any will to change the political scene is because around 50% of the population is now government dependent, whether they're getting subsidized through welfare or they work for the government. The rich as well, I think, get a cut from, the government pie, so they're subsidized. It's the guy who's trying to make his way, who's the forgotten man in this equation, and the minority, right? I mean, in the sense of the political minority that has nothing to gain from this system, who has all the incentive to change it, but he's outnumbered by the rest.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much to get into, Mark. I know we will in the weeks and months ahead on the daily objective. Just the depravity of the entitlement state, the type of thing that incentivizes you for not working, for resenting wealthy, successful people. Dr. Brooke always talks about, if you met Bill Gates walking down the street, would you say to him, hey man, you owe me money. Like, where's my 10 grand, Bill Gates? Of course not. But that's what we want government to do. We want to say, hey, you rich people, give me more, give me some money. If I saw Bill Gates, I would literally get down on my knees and thank him. Thank you. Thank you. What else can you say to someone like Bill Gates or someone like Jeff Bezos?
Yeah, I think maybe a Bezos. I don't know that I'd give my love to Bill, just because I think he's compromised himself so intensely over the years.
Swap Bezos if you must, but
but maybe I'd say thank you for what you did before, not so much for what you're doing now, but for what you did before. Yeah, you're right. We have to have a philosophical and moral shift in this country that I don't know is going to happen anytime in our lifetime, but we can keep striving for that change by, attempting in our own way to popularize this message. Reason, independence, sovereignty are good things, and the more the government steals your moral agency, it comes at the price, my friend, of your own life. You have to remember that.
I just want to say Wes Stewart's super generous contribution. Wes says it's startling to me how often I hear people in real life say something along the lines of billionaires shouldn't exist. You've heard that, Mark.
I've heard eat the rich. I've heard billionaires shouldn't exist. I've heard people say kill them, as a matter of fact. Yes. I mean, it's now popular in the establishment to imply that these people should be gone. They should not exist. That is a terrifying development. It's a development that I could see happening in Europe. Europe never understood the concept of rights, really. America did have a grasp of it for a time. And it was even in our sense of life. Even if we didn't fully grasp it, it was in our sense of life. Now that is even being distilled out of us by public schools. Thank you very much. So
philosophical zombie hunter, thank you for your generous contribution. He says, why don't we make taxes voluntary, and then progressives can go around persuading people that the social contract exists to pay them?
Yeah, there you go. But the left isn't into persuasion, as we've already seen. They like force, raw, brute force, because their ideas can't be persuasive. Do you have any final notes, Jonathan? Anything
Sure,
you want
just
to
to
say?
thank Kathleen for her contribution, Gail for her contribution, and tell everyone what's coming up, unless you'd like to.
Either way, you go ahead. You run with it.
Sure. Well, at 7 p.m. UK, the Fountainhead Book Club for ARC UK members. It's going to be live stream, and such a great book to get to read it with experts like James Valiant, like so many others. You get so much more out of it. So it's a great reason to become a member of the Ayn Rand Center UK. And then tomorrow, Keeping It Real with James Valiant and Robert Nasser will be live streamed at 3 p.m. UK instead of the usual 4 p.m. So just have every day you have interesting, great content, aesthetics, politics, everything here with the Ayn Rand Center UK. So thanks for making us part of your media diet.
Yes, thanks, guys. And we will see you next time on the Daily Objective. And always remember to check your premises. Peace.